You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday 30th of June 2014. UK isolated and near EU exit after vote, says press. NHS worker who bullied Muslim by praying for her. Poor white pupils put off school by multicultural timetable. Tottenham Ayatollah Omar Bakri's family launch bid for him to be given asylum in Britain after claiming he is being tortured in Lebanon. Angel of Woolwich, who confronted Lee Rigby's killers, faces police quiz over racial abuse allegations. And special CIA unit sent to UK as Obama labels UK a breeding ground for terrorism. Interview with Nick Griffin MEP. And finally, 2 for 1 day, Monday. UK news, and it is a UK news day today. UK isolated and near EU exit after vote, says press. UK isolated and near EU exit after vote as Prime Minister David Cameron's flagrant failure to stop the appointment of Jean-Claude Juncker as President of the European Commission threatens Britain's future within the EU, newspapers across the United Kingdom have said. The UK Prime Minister said the reforms he wants for the bloc will now be harder to achieve with Juncker at the helm, but he vowed, "I'm not going to back down," and that was not his last stand in Europe. After the key vote, newspapers across the UK said that Britain was moving dangerously close to an exit from the 28-nation bloc after Cameron's crushing defeat in stopping Juncker's nomination. Juncker, Luxembourg's Prime Minister from 1995 to 2013 and the Eurogroup chief from 2005 to 2013, was named President of the European Commission on Friday by EU leaders despite Britain's objections. One step closer to quitting Europe, the Conservative Daily Telegraph splashed on its front page after the 26-2 vote in favour of Juncker at an EU summit in Brussels. World at 8. Juncker's appointment was a deliberate setup to see just how far the EU can push us into submission. Then the financial blackmail will start. NHS worker bullied Muslim by praying for her. The Telegraph reports a Christian health worker has begun a legal challenge after being disciplined by the NHS for praying with a Muslim colleague. Victoria Wastoney, a senior occupational therapist in one of the country's most racially diverse areas, was also accused of bullying the colleague after giving her a book about a Muslim woman who converts to Christianity. In addition, senior managers told Miss Wastoney that it was inappropriate to invite the woman to a community sports day organised by her church. The complaints led to Miss Wastoney being suspended on full pay for 9 months. 3 charges were upheld against the 37-year-old Christian at an internal disciplinary hearing in February, and 5 charges were found to be unsubstantiated. She had to accept a final written warning at work which will remain on her records for 12 months, as well as accept a range of other requirements designed to stop her discussing her faith and beliefs with colleagues. Miss Wastoney said she was challenging her employees in court because political correctness in the NHS was stifling ordinary conversations about faith. "I believe in tolerance for everyone, and that's why I'm challenging what has happened to me," she added. World at 8. So much for local schools to be bullied into visiting local mosques then. This is nothing short of ridiculous. This Muslim should be fined for wasting time. Poor white pupils put off school by multicultural timetable. A study by Lambeth Council suggested that the curriculum needed to be overhauled to stop poor white children being pushed to the edges. White working class children are being marginalised at school after being forced to follow a multicultural timetable that shuns British traditions, according to research. Large numbers of schools follow a curriculum that celebrates a diverse range of pupils while sidelining those from poor British families, it was claimed. Head teachers told how they ran numerous projects such as Black History Month and Cultural Days to raise awareness of countries such as Portugal, Poland and Jamaica. But it was claimed that white British pupils from deprived homes often cannot see themselves or their lives reflected in the curriculum, turning them off school altogether. The study, published by Lambeth Council in South London, said that poor children were further isolated by a small world mentality, with parents failing to take them to the local park or visit places of interest. Researchers called on the Department for Education to develop a curriculum that treats white British identity in the same way as ethnic minorities. That'll be the day. World at 8 reminds me of a letter in the Daily Mail from a guy who's just learnt that his grandchild is not being taught any Christian religion at all, but a bit of Islam in his state school. The time has come for the worm to turn, surely. Tottenham Ayatollah Omar Bakri's family launched bid for him to be given asylum in Britain over claim he is being tortured in Lebanon. Extremist preacher Omar Bakri Mohammed will not be allowed back into Britain, the government has insisted, amid reports he intends to claim asylum in the UK. The radical Islamic cleric faces the death sentence for running a terror cell in Lebanon and claims he's been tortured, according to reports. Family members have said they are launching an urgent appeal to allow him back into Britain under asylum laws, but the Home Office has ruled out a return. Bakri, who holds a Syrian and Lebanese citizenship, lived in Britain for 20 years and led radical group Al-Mujahirun until it was disbanded. He faced possible treason charges over his support for the London bombers in 2005 and fled Britain for Lebanon, the British government barring him from returning. World at 8. I'm against splitting families or clans, so his entire family should be with him in his time of need. Angel of Woolwich, who confronted Lee Rigby's killers, faces police quiz over racial abuse allegations. Ingrid Loyo-Kennett, 49, faces an investigation over an alleged incident at her local Tesco store. The woman, dubbed the Angel of Woolwich after she confronted Lee Rigby's killers, is to be quizzed by police over claims she racially abused a Tesco pharmacist. Ingrid Loyo-Kennett, 49, received national acclaim for calmly talking to armed Michael Adebolejo and Michael Adebowale after the soldiers' slaying in the street. But the Cub Scout leader now faces a police investigation over an alleged incident at her local store. Miss Loyo-Kennett was said to have had a row with a black pharmacist as customers looked on. It was claimed she told the man he should not be allowed in England and should be working in Nigeria. Security guards were called and she was marched out of the building in Helston, Cornwall on Friday. World at 8. Although she waited until poor Lee Rigby was dead along with many other viewers, she is right. Africans have no rights being in the UK at all. And after all, she has seen the other side of the coin, hasn't she? Special CIA unit sent to a UK as Obama labels UK a breeding ground for terrorism. Washington takes concerns over Islamism in Britain into its own hands, concerned that ISIS influence can spread to the West. As more and more world leaders are becoming frustrated over the unchecked growth of radical Islam in the UK, the Obama administration has taken the unusual action of sending intelligence agents to Britain to take matters into their own hands and evaluate the threat posed to the West from UK-based extremists, according to the Daily Mail. Sources close to British intelligence told the Mail that the move follows an admission by Britain's MI5 and MI6 intelligence services that they have had difficulty tracking the flow of British nationals to and from Syria, where Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, ISIS and Al-Qaeda were revealed to have been training foreign nationals to bring terror back home with them. Obama sent a special Central Intelligence Agency CIA unit to the UK to investigate Islamic extremism there, the Daily Mail reports Sunday, over concerns that the UK has become a breeding ground for terrorism. World at 8. Does this mean we're next for the USA's invasion list? Now we'll be having a fairly short chat with Nick Griffin MEP, recorded last Friday when he was in Italy with the Italian nationalists carrying out his last jobs as an MEP. We'll be covering the Banbury Muslim groomings and the appointment of Jean-Claude Juncker to the presidency of the Euro Parliament and what effect that might have on our status within the EU.
Hi Nick.
Hello there.
How are you getting on in Italy?
Oh, fine, thank you very much.
Right, we have something to think about here. What do you think of the disparity in the reporting of the Savile abuses, which were truly terrible, and the Cyril Smith ones, when the new Banbury Muslim grooming has just come to light? Does this send out the usual message of hands off Islam, which seems to be redolent throughout the country now?
Well, I certainly think it's an example of, yet another example of the unbelievable political correctness of the broadcast media especially. Certainly the Mail, several of the other newspapers as I've seen, have run the Oxford-Banbury grooming story, but not a word on the BBC, in national terms, whereas, as you say, Savile quite rightly has been all over the place. So, yeah, there is that bias, and they call us Islamophobic, but I would say they're Islamophiles to the point that really, if they can possibly avoid criticism, they will. And the wicked thing about this, for all the Savile abuses were truly terrible, the monster is dead. He can't do it again. No one's at risk from Jimmy Savile. Whereas in the case of Muslim grooming gangs, it's going on right now, and not just in the big northern cities, as the Banbury Oxford thing shows, right now all over the country. And these poor girls, they simply don't know that there is any risk because they don't read the newspapers, even if it's in the newspapers. They watch television, or they speak to friends who watch television, so they don't see it. They don't know there's a risk. So therefore, more of them are falling prey to others of these Muslim grooming gangs right now. And that's really the disgusting thing about the way in which the broadcast media keep it all quiet.
Yes, I quite agree. I quite agree with that. And also there is the point that whenever a soap program is shown or adverts, the white girls are always partnered by an ethnic, whether it be a black person or whether it be an Asian. And so
yes,
we have at least two generations of young girls thinking that it's preferable to date an Asian guy than it is to go out with a white guy.
Yeah, sure. You're absolutely right. And they're actually pressured on two levels here. There's the social pressure of it's cool and it's the thing to do because everyone's doing it. And at the same time, from especially girls at the better schools, from more middle class families, they've got the pressure of, oh, you mustn't be racist. So they can't object, and they can't even suspect that there's a problem. Their mind's blanking off. So they really are vulnerable. Simon Darby gave a very damning turn of phrase to explain what's going on. He said how the media, the schools and so on, they pre-stun these girls for what's going to happen to them. They're already vulnerable because their brains have been knocked out of kilter. It's a truly appalling thing. It really is. I don't know if you saw, Lynn, the material that Simon and I shot with the very brave mother in Manchester, whose daughter was gang raped. It's very powerful stuff. I do recommend people watch it on BNP TV. But the same thing came there. I talked to the daughter as well. She and her friends had no idea any of this was going on. They're not daft, those girls, but the schools hadn't told them at all. The police hadn't told them at all, and nor the mass media. And they are indeed just lambs for the slaughter.
They are indeed, and also, of course, we're up against the fact that the parents have probably been heavily indoctrinated to believe that any sort of protest would be racist.
Well, certainly, that was something. One of the worst things that was when we were first trying to break this story, nearly 10 years ago now. I spoke to a number of parents, particularly in Keighley, and when they complained to the police had turned around and said, "Well, are you a racist? Do you object to your daughter going out with Asians?" And it's not that they're necessarily brainwashed, but they're scared about it, and it really is a terrible thing. The good news, of course, is that, let's face it, at least in Banbury they've arrested them.
Yeah.
5 years ago that wouldn't have happened. It would have gone on and on and on. So our pressure and the threat of a public backlash over it has finally forced the police to act, and a very, very, very good thing indeed. I think that's one of the reasons, a knock-on effect. In order to cover this, I think that's where, obviously, Savile is a different matter, and obviously the creature deserved to die. It's, in a way, it's a shame he's dead and can't face justice. But with some of the other so-called historical sex abuse cases, when they've, Jim Davis and people like that have been arrested, put through hell, and then there's nothing to charge them with. I'm absolutely sure that those people, they've said, we've got to find some white men to put in the frame for paedophilia in order to balance the books. But of course, there is no comparison between certainly what some of those people were doing, in fact, in many cases, with young girls and women not well over the age of 16, and yet people shouldn't abuse their celebrity status. But on the other hand, especially, I'm sure you remember what the 1960s were like. It wasn't exactly all one-way traffic, and girls legally aged would have been throwing themselves at celebrities.
They were.
And now I'm sure you didn't, of course.
I didn't, of course, when I was married, but I did know people that did.
Yeah, indeed so. So anyway, as I say, the good thing for our people to concentrate on is the fact that for all the injustice of the way the media handle it and so on, at least finally the police are taking some action. And some of these people, when they've been sentenced, they're getting really long sentences, the sentences that they deserve.
Yes, I think along with those sentences, their families should be deported.
Well, I think there is a question arising as what is their community doing? Why didn't their community say, no, this is wrong? And certainly from now on, you could argue when it was unknown, perhaps their communities, their families didn't know what was going on. Frankly, I doubt that, but you could argue that if you want to be just. But from now on, really, their community needs to be held to account. We're constantly, where there's a long-running campaign to make British and American taxpayers pay reparations for slavery, something that was done by a small elite, which, let's face it, screwed ordinary people as well, but several hundred years ago. So if collective guilt does exist, then let's start to see the Muslim community address this poison within their midst, and not just this one, the related one of heroin as well, because that's a crime from criminal elements in their community and almost exclusively their community against the rest of us. And it's time they spoke up and did something about it.
It is, and I think there should be very heavy legal and financial penalties for these people, because if anyone tells me that these families don't know what's going on, either with their jihadi sons or the sons that go out and do grooming, sexual grooming to our underage girls, they're wrong, because those families know everything those children do. They certainly don't have the sort of family setup that is the average in the Western world, where nobody really knows what's going on. There's one parent or there may be two, something like that. Their families are very different. They're very, very cohesive.
Yes, and likewise the wider community as well. So yeah, definitely so. There is of course there's a connection, perhaps in terms of you put it on a continuum line between grooming of our young girls and selling heroin to our kids and the outright jihadism. Because in India, the Hindus and the Sikhs actually they refer to it as a love jihad or a sex jihad, and it's a matter of taking girls from other communities. There's no doubt about it. That's what's they start with that. They go through the phase of using racist violence against their white neighbours. And this has been reported of one of the Cardiff jihadis. They start at that point, they go through that continuum, and they end up volunteering to go and fight in Syria or Iraq or whatever with some of the worst monsters the world has seen. And of course, that's not the end of the story, is it? Because they're going to be coming back home.
Exactly. Yes, and apart from that, somehow, I don't know, I feel deeply that most of these things, these points you brought up, Nick, are actually endemic in their culture and their heritage, which is so alien to ours. I mean, we have our own demons in the Western world, obviously. Yes. We're not perfect, very far from it, but they're not the same demons as the Islamic demons, put it like that.
Indeed. It's a very, very different thing, particularly from Pakistan and Somalia as well. The ones that we've got come from some parts of the Islamic world where they're particularly demon-ridden, shall we say.
Yes. And there is really there's no conscience, because they're doing what they've been doing for hundreds and hundreds of years in one country or another. There's no conscience. They're not consciously coming over, taking women and taking them away in slave ships or doing anything like that. It's all very, very subtle, but it's been going on thousands of years, actually.
Yes, yeah.
That's all.
Yes, indeed. It's the inevitable problem of putting two very different ways of looking at the world. Yeah. Together in a small enclosed island, especially when one side is, by the people who control its mass media and so on, deprived of all knowledge of what's going on.
Yes.
And left vulnerable to it. It's very unfair, and it's going to get, I think, a lot worse before it gets better. But equally, I can tell you this: there's an awful lot of people out there quietly saying the BNP are right. It's sinking home.
We actually did our job some years ago, really, in some ways. as far as the political scene goes, where people are actually discussing this now, and as you say, they are arresting the people.
Yes.
Which is a miracle in itself. Actually.
Absolutely so. Yeah, well, let's put it this way: we've done the first part of our job.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to do.
There is a hell of a lot more to do, I guess. Now, moving swiftly on, as they say, how do you view the appointment of Jean-Claude Juncker? How do you think it will affect the status of the United Kingdom in the European Parliament?
It won't make any difference within the Parliament. It'll just carry on. The Parliament is a fig leaf. Always has been, always will be. But what it does show, and it won't actually change anything, because the European Union will just continue on the path which was designed for it from the very beginning, of ever closer union until it becomes a single federal superstate on the ruins of the old nations of Europe, including, of course, ours. The only difference that Juncker's appointment makes is that it makes it absolutely crystal clear that the German and the French elites who really run the show don't give a damn about Mr. Cameron and his political problems at home. And whatever Cameron says, all the promises he makes about we're going to renegotiate, don't you worry, then we'll have a referendum when we tell you how great it's going to be, it's all lies, because he cannot possibly deliver, because the Europhiles simply won't allow it. And they've really made it, to be fair to them, actually, they've made it pretty clear, haven't they?
Well, they have.
They don't give a damn what Cameron says or thinks or does. There's another thing, apart from the big headlines about the appointment of Juncker, it also came out the Polish foreign minister, who's actually, well, he's a neocon, very much in the modern Tory line. He was secretly recorded over in Poland, criticising Cameron, saying that he'd effed up and so on, and making it absolutely crystal clear that reform isn't even on the table. Again, that's come out directly through Europe too, that they publish their lists at the start of each parliamentary term of what's on the agenda seriously for the next 5 years, what the priorities are. And, of course, Cameron's saying it's all going to be renegotiated for a referendum in 2017, which is, 3 years away. And yet the European Parliament's agenda for the next 5 years doesn't have anything on it about reform or renegotiation. It simply isn't going to happen. It's going to be a little bit of flim-flam, and Cameron will, I'm sure, come back saying, oh, it's all going to be great, vote yes. And he's not going to be delivering anything because they won't let him.
Yeah. Well, he is vastly outnumbered.
He's hugely outnumbered, and they don't give a damn. The Germans and the French, they don't actually want to lose Britain. The Germans because it's good cover, and the French because they think we help to potentially balance Germany, and various other countries because our taxes are very, very useful for building their motorways and sorting out their problems.
Yeah.
They don't particularly want to lose Britain, but they don't give a damn. They're going ahead with their unification project, whether Britain wants it or not. And there's nothing the Tory party can do to stop that.
No. The only thing we can do is literally withdraw, whether they like it or not, and refuse to pay the fine.
That's the only thing that can be done, because when you're dealing with a ship which is heading in one direction, it's a massive thing. You can't, as a passenger, just say turn it round. You can try it once or twice. When they refuse, you've simply got to jump overboard, and that's what Britain's got to do, and get the hell out of it. It would be to our financial interest, certainly to our political interest, in terms of our recovering our sovereignty, control of our borders, and all the rest of it. It has to be done. There's also the fact that there's two forces in the world now, particularly pushing the warmongering that's going on against Russia. It's very ironic. They had this conference in Ypres, the other day where this vote was held. Of course, the scene of some of the most appalling British casualties of the First World War. Two ironies in this, really. Firstly, that war was fought, at least at one level, to prevent German domination of Europe. And 100 years later, we're exactly back where we started. And the other thing is that they, of course, picked Ypres, and particularly this date, yesterday and the day before. It was the 100th anniversary of the assassination in Sarajevo that set the clock absolutely ticking for the First World War. And there they are to celebrate the way in which the European Union, as they say, prevented war in Europe. And all of them, Cameron included, are doing everything they possibly can to rattle the cage of President Putin and Russia, and to use Russia's determination to protect Russian people in eastern Ukraine as, if not yet an excuse for war, certainly an excuse for sanctions and hostility and all the rest of it. You know, the First World War didn't happen overnight. There was a decade or more of these close calls and diplomatic arguments and hate propaganda, and more than a decade, in fact, before it actually broke out. And they're doing exactly the same thing now. And the European Union is very much part of that. So is our government, for that matter, and of course the USA. But the closer we are to Europe, the more risk there is that we're seen as being involved in that as well. So it's not just bad for us economically, politically, legally, and all the rest of it. It's pretty bloody bad if it actually leads us to World War III. We really would be better off out.
Yeah, and also, I suppose this is what you were reading. Actually, you were writing about this, I think, or speaking about this some time ago. I've actually covered it very, very briefly in today's thought, and that is the Coudenhove-Kalergi plot that actually started the EU. And of course, it's happening, isn't it? It's there. It's before our eyes.
It's all of it happening, and something I didn't write about at the time. It's happening to even this extent. Part of Coudenhove-Kalergi's overall sort of way of looking at the world, he was extremely hostile to Russia.
Oh, was he?
So even that same thing, this attempt to basically set the two halves of European civilization and the peoples of Europe at each other's throats. He and his backers were trying to do that, just after the First World War, and they're still trying to do it today.
And they also did it after the Second World War, of course, with giving half of Europe to the communists. Yeah,
indeed, sir. Yes, well, really the Second World War wasn't the Second World War in a way. It was the continuation of the First World War, just after 20 years, seconds out, break in the corner. And as you say, at the end of that, all these people happily gave Eastern Europe to the communists. Again, a shocking crime. Just as in another rather eerie parallel, having interfered and smashed up Iraq, they now found that they'd given vast amounts of the Middle East over to a monstrous, brutal ideology, as utopian and therefore as crazed and dangerous as Bolshevism ever was.
It's actually far more so, in a way.
Yeah, these jihadi crackpots. And if it hadn't been for Western interference in those countries, with a little bit of help from particularly Saudi Arabia, pouring money into those crazies and their ideology, the Middle East would be a peaceful place. As it is, it's now descending into an absolute hellhole, the sectarian hatred. So guess what? First we're going to get the refugees, and then we'll get the terrorism.
Yeah, and in fact we have already got the refugees. And probably
I'm sure there's more to come.
Yeah, and terrorism isn't far behind. You're quite right there. Well, I think we've covered everything now. I think we set the world to rights.
Yep. Well, yes, but of course, I do urge people to consider. There's no point just nodding along. You've got to get involved and do something. On the question of warmongering, it's one in particular. A couple of our volunteers have put together a very, very good, I think, video which they've done with BNP TV.
All right.
About the way in which the Western media, you started talking about the cover-up of the Oxford grooming in the broadcast media. Well, the way in which they've covered up and still cover up the extent of anti-Russian hatred and attacks in Ukraine, which are the things which, if Russia is forced to intervene, will be the reason for it. Very, very important that people see that and especially share it on the internet. It's so powerful now. Our Facebook reach is absolutely gigantic. Our online activist base is very, very good. And that video, it really is a great opportunity to people. Just copy the URL and just paste it everywhere. And if you won't get it on a newspaper report about Putin or Russia, because that'll be censored. If they won't let you put it on there, stick it in the Guardian page. Doesn't matter where it goes. Every newspaper's got dozens of pages. If you look, if it's non-controversial, if it's a story about a dog that's adopted a kitten or something like that, those stories aren't moderated. So just put it there, because it's off topic and not everyone will watch it, but some will. And the only way in which the warmongers get their way is if people don't understand what they're doing and don't understand the truth. And the internet is at present and still, and long may it remain, a fantastic weapon for spreading the truth. but only if people go out and do it. So please, if you're listening, go out and do it.
Lovely. Thank you, Nick, and I sincerely hope they take your advice.
Okay, thanks very much, Lynn. I'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Nick.
And finally, 2 for One Day Monday. Today we're having a Monday laugh at lawyers and the Jews, bless 'em. Lawyers should never ask a Georgia grandma a question if they aren't prepared for the answer. In a trial, a southern small-town prosecuting attorney called his first witness, a grandmotherly elderly woman, to the stand. He approached her and asked, "Mrs. Jones, do you know me?" She responded, "Why, yes, I know you, Mr. Williams. I've known you since you were a boy, and frankly you've been a big disappointment to me. You lie, you cheat on your wife, and you manipulate people and talk about them behind their backs. You think you're a big shot when you haven't the brains to realise you'll never amount to anything more than a 2-bit paper pusher. Yeah, I know you." The lawyer was stunned. Not knowing what else to do, he pointed across the room and asked, "Mrs. Jones, do you know the defence attorney?" She again replied, "Why, yes, I do. I've known Mr. Bradley since he was a youngster too. He's lazy, bigoted and has a drinking problem. He can't build a normal relationship with anyone, and his law practice is one of the worst in the entire state. Not to mention he cheated on his wife with 3 different women. One of them was your wife. Yeah, I know him." The defence attorney nearly died. The judge asked both counsellors to approach the bench and said in a very quiet voice, "If either of you idiots asks her if she knows me, I'll send you both to the electric chair." 2 little old Jewish men, Sid and Abe, were sitting in a Mexican restaurant one day. Sid asks Abe, "Do you know if any of our people of our ancestry were ever born and raised in Mexico?" Abe replies, "I don't know, let's ask our waiter." When the waiter arrives, Abe asks, "Are there any Mexican Jews?" The waiter says, "I don't know, senor, I asked the cooks." He returns from the kitchen after a few minutes and says, "No, senor, the cooks say no Mexican Jews." Abe isn't satisfied and asks, "Are you absolutely sure?" The waiter, realising he's dealing with gringos, replies, "I check once again, senor," and goes back into the kitchen. While the waiter is away, Sid says, "I find it hard to believe there are no Jews in Mexico. Our people are scattered everywhere." The waiter returns and says, "Senor, the head cook Manuel, he say there are no Mexican Jews." "Are you certain?" Abe asked again. "I just can't believe there are no Mexican Jews." "Senor, I ask everyone," replies the exasperated waiter. "All we have is orange juice, grape juice, prune juice, tomato juice and apple juice, but no Mexican Jews." You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night.